Mr. Sonnenfeldt, first of all, welcome to Jamestown, Chautauqua Institution. I'm trying to recall, but I can't. Is this your first visit to the hometown area of Robert H. Jackson?
Well, it is a long-delayed and wonderful first visit.
Well, that's terrific. What is it that brings you here this time?
Well, I'm close to the Jackson Center, and I've donated some of my papers from the Nuremberg trials to them, brought them up personally through a rainstorm, and I'm scheduled to speak at the Hall of Philosophy at the Chautauqua Institution this afternoon. That was a wonderful invitation.
Absolutely. What are you going to be speaking to the people at the Hall of Philosophy about?
Well, if I can say it as briefly as I can, I was chief interpreter of the American prosecution at the Nuremberg trials and witnessed the trials, the Nazis, the prosecutors, and the judges. And one of the things I'm going to talk about are first the events that led to the rise and defeat of Nazism, their trial in court, and what, if anything, we have learned from it and how we can apply it today. Now, there's a big, long story.
Absolutely. How was it that you became chief interpreter for the trial?
Well, I have to tell you, purely by accident. One of the people who was active in the organization of the trials before it was really determined where and when they would be held was Wild Bill Donovan. He ran OSS, the predecessor of CIA. And I was a combat soldier a few days after the war in the depths of Austria, and he came up there to interview somebody who had been active in the resistance, and he needed an interpreter. And his words were, after he checked out my German, he says, "Your English is so much better than my other interpreters. How would you like to come to work for me?" And I said, "Where?" And he said, "I'm headquartered in Paris." And I said, "I'm coming." So it was purely an accident, but I performed well enough, so I became the first interpreter of the American prosecution, and as it was organized, I later became the chief interpreter who had 12 other interpreters working for him as we moved into Nuremberg and the preparations for the trials started.
And looking back on that now, nearly 60 years later, did you realize at the time, you were just a young man then, did you realize the magnitude of what you were taking part in?
Well, I tell you, I was 22 years old, and I had a 10th grade education, and I was so busy interpreting the questions of the investigators from English into German, and the answers of the witnesses, the chief Nazis, from German into English, that I really didn't have a lot of time to think about anything else. But you couldn't escape the feeling that I was participating in a world event, and the true significance of it. And all that happened there, frankly, took many years to sink in.
I can imagine. Your thoughts about the book that you wrote, Surviving the Nazis. Did you feel it was important to get these experiences down on paper?
Well, actually, the book started because one of my children, my oldest granddaughter, had to write an essay about an immigrant to the United States and started interviewing me. And, I've lived in America for 60 years, had 2 American wives, really no connection with Germany, and that was the first time that my family, they knew I'd been born in Germany and all that, heard some of the details of my early life, and they prevailed on me to write it down. So I wrote it all out, and as you've probably heard, I was invited to Germany, gave several speeches there, and somebody found I had an English manuscript, and they bought it sight unseen, and it became a German book. Actually, a modest bestseller.